Hi, everyone. Thanks for hopping on. We'll give like 30 seconds or a minute here to get started, just so more people can hop on. Thanks for joining. I say this every time, but we should have like music or something at the first like 30 seconds or minute of this. I want to give everyone a chance to hop on. I'm gonna drink some coffee while we're waiting. We'll get started. It looks like the majority of people that signed up are here. Not all, but majority. Thanks for hopping on, you guys. Sorry about the delay of this one by a week. I appreciate you guys hopping on today. We will continue this on a monthly basis. As always, if you guys have topic suggestions or you'd like me to go over something specific, please let us know in the chat, or you can send a request to support@rakedigital.com. We just go on internal suggestions here, or I just make something up for these webinars. So always want to make sure that these are still useful to you all and the topics that you guys want to hear about. So make sure that you give us topic suggestions if you have any. Of course, if you have any questions during this webinar or related to the topics that we're going to talk about today or not, feel free to put that in the chat or QA section as well. So the topics that we're going to talk about today is go over Finlee reporting. So the reports that you can run in Finlee, there are different sections for different types of reports. So there may be some you're super familiar with, some that you maybe don't use and can start utilizing if you'd like to. And then I did want to, probably at the same time that we're going through reports, talk about suspense and non-customer accounts just as a general reminder and best practice within Finlee. Of course, we're always going to allot time for Q&A to follow after these topics. So we're just going to hop right in to Finlee. I have a little bar that I didn't move before this, so I need to just X out of that. All right. So the dashboard, I guess, really doesn't fall under the same category of report because this isn't something that we can export, but we'll mainly be talking about reports that we can export out of different parts of the system today. But the dashboard is always a good place to do a big overall review of the Kanban board. So really all the information that drives from the dashboard, just kind of as a general reminder, is the net impact of all the Kanban cards that have been added through subledger reconciliation or manually. So that should be a total value of all the variances that are outstanding on the Kanban board. So that's usually a great overview. If you feel that these values are skewed, we'll talk a little bit about the suspense and non-customer variances that potentially report, and that's kind of the same topic that we'll get into. If you feel that this value is skewed a little bit, we can talk about how to address that. This is always a great overview. If you're in management particularly, this is a really good tool to look at kind of the status of the Kanban board. If you guys have a standard of when items should clear, the aging items will tell you how long those variances have been outstanding on the Kanban board. So maybe don't ignore it when you look at it. If you see something that looks a little bit odd, investigate that on the Kanban board, and that will help you with take a detector of the overall health of the cards that are outstanding on the Kanban board. So really the main thing that we think about when we think about reports within Finlee is the reports section here. There are other sections that we're going to go over, but we don't want to ignore the standard reports that we have here. A few of you, if you opt into the returns module, may have an additional report here that I'm not going to review today, but if you guys import like returns files and maintain a returns account, then there are reports that generate from those imports, but we're not going to review that today. So we have three main sections of reports here: ledger reports, bank file, reports, and then customer. That speaks to the 3 of the 4 different types of data that we're importing into the system or maintaining within Finlee pretty regularly. So it's just as it sounds. The ledger reports really correspond mostly to the ledger transactions that you're maintaining that you can look at within the search ledger. And there are things that I recommend running at some frequency or understanding about these reports. So under the ledger reports, we're going to first go under customer balance summary. This is just simply by default, the customer reporting by bank account what the overall ledger balance is. Remember that any ledger balance that we're reporting within Finlee typically has 2 columns, which is the posted and pending. And your overall customer ledger is the total of those 2 amounts. So posted corresponds to any transactions that have cleared during bank reconciliation, or just a small stipulation on that, or part of beginning balances. So when you came over, if you have a beginning ledger balance of you were holding for this customer $2,000, then that is also part of the posted because it's part of the beginning balance that we set up on your account. And then pending or any uncleared transactions there. Posted also include like non-banking there. While those have a non-zero impact to your ledger overall, if you have a lot of bulk payments, then you'll have like $5,000 hitting customer 1,000, and then the opposite side of that going to your master account. So you'll see the impact on the posted side of the non-banking when you're reporting by customer, but they have an overall zero impact to your bank balance overall. So not to get confusing while I'm talking about customer balance summary, but by default, it's going to show all customers and all bank accounts. In the customize field here, you have a lot of options to customize what you're looking at, but I think you guys are probably pretty familiar with that, but maybe what you're not familiar with is that you can change the group by of these reports. So if you didn't want to group by bank account, which if you have 2 tax accounts, you can see the separate amounts that you're holding in each of those tax accounts. If you switch to ledger, then it would report under the tax ledger that can have multiple bank accounts per customer. So if you recently changed tax accounts on a customer and you don't want to see the individual reporting of the old tax account and the new tax account, you can kind of switch that group by under the customize to ledger there. You can also add, and I really recommend this for customers that utilize quarter, you can add a group by quarter. So if on your ledger you always define quarter, then you can start balancing by quarter with this customer balance summary report as well by adding that group by in. So if you guys do have the quarter filled and it accurately pulls appropriate quarter dependent on the tax payment report that you're importing in, then you can look at previously closed quarters to start looking into the detail of your liability variances or when an account is out of balance. So that group by can really help leverage the information of the total balances on the ledger and do certain group bys that could help you in your researching there. You can also remove the group by of bank there and see just by total by customer of all client funds that you're holding, or even just see totals per ledger by bank there. So maybe we're not fully aware of the group by functionality, so I wanted to make sure to run that. This report I do typically recommend running pretty frequently for non-tax accounts, meaning bank accounts that are not tax. When you're running tax overall ledger, to us, that doesn't give us the full picture there. Let me just go back to my default because I was messing with the parameters there and I just don't want to have to redo that. So when you're running a customer balance summary, just looking at the overall amount that you're holding for a customer on the tax ledger, looking at just the ledger side doesn't give you the full view of that. And when we talk about liability variance report, we'll talk about the other aspect, because you're supposed to be holding money typically for each customer for future tax payments that you need to make. So there's never a time when that goes to zero in my experience. It may be very, very infrequently. Customers will often ask, can we implement at a quarter end so that there's no tax balances? Well, you are already likely processing payrolls that are into the next quarter. So there's never a time when your tax overall ledgers are zero or maintained as zero. So I always typically recommend running these for non-tax accounts, because typically for all non-tax accounts where you're holding client funds, you should have an overall zero balance on those. Just in my test environment here, that's not the case, but I would regularly run any non-zero value on, I said that in a strange way. I would run any non-tax accounts, running the customer balance summary to research any non-zero amounts here. I would also, so we do report anytime that a non-tax ledger goes into the negative. That's what a negative liability is on subledger reconciliation. But I do recommend running this report to look at the positive overall balances. If it's like a trust account or OBC account where you shouldn't be holding any money on the ledger there, or negative or positive, I would run this pretty frequently to make sure that it's not out of balance in the positive way on this. This also allows you to run like reports on all customers, regardless if they're marked as internal or not. So I'll talk about internal customers really quickly, just because you guys probably have customers set as internal. So it's good to know who's set as internal. And we'll talk about the definition of that in just a second, because it goes into my second topic. But if you want to check internal customers that you have marked under tenant, if you have access to that, only probably 1 or 2 people at your organization do have access to tenant services, which allows you to manage users. But you also, under tenant organization, you have the option to set a customer ledger as internal. When we set, like, so for example, on this tenant, I have 1453 set as an internal ledger. That means on subledger reconciliation, I'm never going to report any type of variance on them. This really goes into the discussion of suspense and non-customer ledger. So I'm going to hold off just a second on that, but I didn't want to not complete that thought there. So the customer balance summary, just giving you a total overall ledgers that are reported in Finlee, which is the net posted versus pending. And the group by is probably functionality that you maybe don't currently utilize. And you have a lot of customizations around columns there. The as of date always defaults to today for ledger date. Ledger date in the system is an identifier of when that transaction was added to the ledger. So anything that you imported today is going to have a ledger date of today. So I always do like to use the default of ledger date of today, because that will include anything with the transaction date or expected clear date of the future. But if you're looking for something specifically as of a quarter or balances as through like all due dates of the prior quarter, you can leverage transaction date and do that specific filter for maybe close of end of quarter for something specific that you're looking for. But I would always probably by default use a ledger date of today, and that's what it defaults to. And that'll show you anything outstanding as of the latest information in your system. Because remember, customer ledgers always take into account future pending transactions as well there. So that's the customer balance summary report. And it's good to know the overall ledger balance of each customer. It's kind of a basic function of the system, but it's absolutely required because we should know what we're holding per customer, per ledger, per bank account there, depending on how you run that report. So the liability variance report, you guys will frequently, I frequently use, you guys probably frequently use. This is going to be a similar information or the exact same information that reports under subledger reconciliation as cards, as liability variances, but sometimes the reporting gives you a little bit more of a visual, or I like to run the report just to look at the overall customers at the same time. But the equivalent of that report in a liability variance is always within the card details as well. So this little snippet here is the exact same information that we're getting on the report version of the liability variance. It's just for that individual customer there. But as you guys already probably know with this report, we have kind of the same information that's on the tax ledger, the customer balance summary here, where we're showing for this customer the overall ledger balance, which is the combination again of the posted versus pending. But we're also taking in that fourth data set that you import on a daily basis, which are your outstanding liabilities by customer. So we want to make sure on a daily basis, and I'm sure you guys all know this, but just going to state it again, that you are holding in the ledger enough to cover all future tax liabilities for a customer. So this is what this comparison is. What I would note, and most of you probably aren't using this functionality, but we do allow in tasks under outstanding liabilities for there to be liability adjustments. So if your software is not capable of making permanent liability adjustments, or you're not able to hold tax payments appropriately, something like that, then you can make permanent liability adjustments. You can delete them, but you can make like liability adjustments within Finlee that will stay until you delete them and won't be replaced by your daily liability variance import. If you operate on UKG, on iSolved, I've never seen a need for that liability adjustment on either of those. So you do have to consider if it's necessary, because you could just probably update your outstanding liability or liability analysis that you're running, or your tax processing system to reflect the appropriate outstanding liability. But the basics about this report, it's really hard not to talk about why the report exists when going through these reports, but the basics of this report, if you want to see something with a threshold or a variance that are non-zero variances, then this variance threshold is really useful here. I usually by default look at anything that's more than $1. We report all variances on subledger reconciliation and even including pennies, but as you guys know, by default, when you add penny cards, they hide on the Kanban board because we don't necessarily consider those priority, but we do have to report anytime that there's any difference, including a cent, 2 cent differences there. If you want to set the threshold at something higher, this is what you can do on this report. Like, let's say I care about anything over 1,000. I think that's a really high threshold. Don't recommend that, but you can set that threshold at 1,000 there, and it'll show you anything with a positive or negative variance. So that's an absolute value larger than $1,000 there. You can really filter this really by anything on your specific tax accounts if you have more than one, even status of accounts. So if you wanted to see all terminated accounts to make sure there's no variances on this comes from the customer list. So whatever status you have on that customer list, you can see, maybe I want to see everything with no status on it and see what the variances look like on those set of customers there. So the as of date as well, this will be as of a ledger date. I don't see a lot of utility for using the as of date, because on the liability side, your balances are replacing the previous balances on a daily basis. So your liabilities are always going to stay stagnant. The as of date is in reference to the ledger and anything that was imported as of that certain date. So I don't see it is there as an option. Let's say that you failed to run the liability analysis out of your system yesterday. So you want to look back one day on the ledger for ledger dates of what was all imported through the day prior, so that it's in balance with your outstanding liabilities. That's maybe a scenario that you'd use the as of date. But other than that, I don't see a lot of utility for doing that, because that's just an as of date on the ledger side, not the liability side, which the liabilities, those imports on a daily basis, replace the previous day there. The other options you have on here is to group by tax code. This will, if you're not actually balancing by tax code, meaning like your subledger reconciliation isn't reporting by tax code, you probably aren't opted into this. Some applications, there are better, like they're better suited for balancing by tax codes than others. But if you run that report, you'll see all accounts come up with the total by tax bucket. So that corresponds to the tax code field that's on your ledger transactions, and will show you totals of the overall ledger. and liability if you're reporting on that side as well, by tax code broken out there. So that is the liability variance report there. As always with all reports, and I failed to mention this before, you can export these reports into CSV. There under that export CSV, I often do that with the liability variance there. And then when you download that, that will send to your notification bell, and then you'll want to download it from your notification bell once it's completed running there. That will only download what you filter. So if you put a threshold of $1 there and run it, this report will download the current filters that you have on that report. The last report here, and I've talked about this report a lot because I do think it's good on a quarterly basis, at least for tax checks, check outstanding checks, but also to look at age uncleared items or outstanding liabilities that corresponds to well, really age uncleared items. I shouldn't have said outstanding liabilities. That's a little bit misleading. Under the workflow for subledger reconciliation, anytime that you have an aged uncleared item, that's a transaction. This report will also show the outstanding ledger transactions. So if you go through achievements on a monthly basis or every couple of months, this is a great report to run. But by default, it's showing all types of transactions. And if you want to specifically look at just checks, then under transaction type, I would hit checks only so that you can see as of today, the ledger date of today, I believe that the default or transaction date of today, every check that's outstanding on the ledger. If you just leave it as its default there, which let me go back and go back in, this will show also transactions or non-check transactions there. I don't know why I'm blanking on the word for that, or just checks. So if you want to specifically use this for something like achievements or checking tax checks, then I always recommend doing a transaction type of check only there. And then transaction date is the only option there because we're driving everything aged by the actual physical transaction date on the ledger. There, we have the same group by options here. If you want to group by all aged items on a certain bank account, then you can look by bank and see everything that's outstanding there for checks only, because I have that filtered by customer. Or if you just want to see a list of outstanding transactions for by customer, then you can put a none grouping there. All right, those are the ledger reports. Bank reconciliation, these are the actual closed bank reconciliations that have been completed within Finlee. And those, it'll have a drop down of any accounts that you've completed any bank reconciliations on, and then the corresponding bank statement for those as well. You can download this report just like any other report. As this one, you can download as a PDF or a CSV here, and it'll give you all the ledger transactions that were cleared on that. So you can do a CSV or a PDF. This report will always have the opening balance as of that period of time, and then the closing balance and everything on the ledger that made up that bank statement and the overall calculation of the balance to that ties back to your ending bank balance. I'll give you the total deposits and payments, and then everything with that corresponding clear date on the ledger there. This shows the ledger transaction, so that'll be a one-to-one match. Sometimes you have like bulk payments that clear the bank, and those will, if you selected one or more ledger transactions, it will show all the detail of those ledger transactions there. So we're actually showing you the ledger transactions, not the bank statement transactions. That's been a question in the past as well. The last report that we have here is just a customer list that you can download. This is exactly the same information that's in the customer list in the menu here, and you can also download it there. It's just a report version maintaining the customer list that we have in Finlee there. It's really dependent on you. We need to have each customer ID in there. And if you use FEIN to match it all, like when we're reading files to upload, like if you upload an EFTPS file, then it's really important to maintain an accurate customer list, or at least a full customer list. But really, as long as you know, when you import a ledger file that doesn't have a new customer or a customer on it, then we'll automatically add that for you so you can see an overall list of the customers that are outstanding. So you guys are probably fully aware of those reports, but there's a handful of other reports in different sections that could be useful to you at some frequency. So I want to make sure to highlight those as well. Under the workflow, on ledger reconciliation, there is an export. So there is a ledger reconciliation report. Now, this report is really great for like if you have SOC audits or internal controls, or your financial institution is asking for justification of what's actually within their bank account. So every time that you hit find variances, we calculate both the adjusted bank balance compared to the ledger balance, which takes in your last closed statement date, plus or minus anything that's uncleared on the bank side for the ledger, and then to the totality of the ledger, including non-banking transactions, beginning balances, outstanding and clear transactions. And every time that you hit that find variances, we do record that activity with the corresponding report kept in the system as well. So if I wanted to go back to when I did the first reconciliation in this test tenant here, I can do a CSV or PDF version. For this sake, I do want to go over the report and download the CSV version. And what this report does is give you a detail of every customer ID that made up your actual overall ledger, and that's tied back to your bank balance. So customers will sometimes ask, okay, how do I know at that point in time what I was holding per customer that tied back to the bank? And this ledger reconciliation report is absolutely the report that will tie that back for you. So it's really important on a daily basis to hit find variances after you do bank reconciliation, because it will record not only the ledger reconciliation at that time, but also this corresponding report. So by ledger here, we'll have a breakdown. I think at the time I only had the tax ledger here. It will show you kind of a report version of what you see on ledger reconciliation, which is the breakdown of both accounts that were in the system at the time with any ledger activity. The last statement date closed. So for tax 2, I just hadn't closed out anything previously for it. Your ending bank balance there, which is the balance per bank for 3/8/2023. Any unclear transactions that on the ledger that are going to clear for that bank in the future, and we need to make sure that that ties back to the totality of the ledger. But then the ledger is broken down by customer ID here. So of that, how much money is that? That's $10.5 million. I can tell the bank exactly, or provide this report exactly what that balance was comprised of by the customer ledger here. So this is a really great report. If you want the PDF version, that just has the overall balances, but the CSV is the one that has the, my PDFs are always open a little strangely, so, but that should be fine. So we'll just give you the overall balance of the ledger, which is the equivalent of the ledger reconciliation there. The CSV will really give you the breakdown per customer there. So that's not a well-known report. That's really useful for you in your internal controls, or if you have a SOC auditor coming, that's always a great one to provide there as well. There is also a report on the Kanban board here, and I think it's pretty functional if you are trying to work maybe with the team on items, or look at your overall variances maybe in a different way. So we have this little icon here called export, and this will download a Kanban card, bank rec card report here. And what's useful about this report is that it will report all your open Kanban boards, but there's a little bit of a trick on the comment section. So I know customer, the amount of the variance, who created it, what day they created, what the ID of it is, the card status of that. But if I wanted to look at all my comments on all of my cards, I could do that here on this report, just to see kind of the comments that are pinned to that. So the keyword there is pinned comments. So if I go ahead and in the functionality of my comments here, pin a comment, then it will show up on this report. Unpinned comments won't. So if I'm waiting on a wire, and then I say need to follow up with customer, I post that and I pin that, then that's the only comment that will show up. So if you need a little bit of extra report on the Kanban board to kind of see this overall status of all of your cards, the latest comment on them, I would probably make it a standard practice on a daily basis that anytime you comment something to pin it. You don't automatically need to do that. Some comments become obsolete, especially like when an amount has updated. But if you need to follow up with them or you put the latest status on the card, then I would probably pin that so that that comes up. If you pin multiple comments, all of those comments will come over on that download of the Kanban board as well. So I do recommend doing that on a daily basis, pinning those comments so that if you ever do utilize that bank rec card report that you can export from this board, that you would see the latest comments on those, which gives you more insight or into your research of those, just if you need to do that. You guys are probably aware, but on the search ledger, we do have a download functionality. So if you want to download what you have filtered, you can always download that. If you trained with me at all, we did that a million times. So I'm sure you're fully aware of that download functionality there. And it will give you a lot of great information on the search ledger that, or the ledger transactions that you're downloading there. So there's a lot of download functionality in the system. Outstanding liabilities, which is gives you the UI for not only your imported liabilities, but any liability adjustments that you've done. You can also download that there. And then I think that is the last section that I wanted to go over as far as reports. So the big ones that maybe can help you on your daily like subledger reconciliation, I do recommend, like I have in a previous webinar, putting due dates on individual items, and having these individual cards to put the specific comments in to assign to someone are always really great. But if you have a bigger volume because quarter end cleanup is still happening, I would make it default practice to pin comments so that you can download that to kind of see a view of all the cards that are outstanding at one time, to see, maybe make a priority of addressing the cards, something like that. So that's usually great functionality to utilize on a daily basis. So the other reminder, and I kind of touch on this a little bit, talking about the internal ledgers here. When you're running reports, I think it's really great to run that kind of independently of subledger reconciliation, just in case you've marked something as internal that maybe isn't appropriate to mark as internal. So internal ledgers, again, I already went over this a little bit, but are company IDs where we never report any variances on them. And typically those would be only for what we'd call suspense or non-customer ledgers. Because we reconcile client funds exclusively within Finlee, there are some situations where you have non-client funds within a client funds account, or you're doing some type of sweep in and out of that client funds account. So a lot of times, like if you're sweeping down to $10,000 on your OBC account, the money you're moving out of there on a daily basis, 250,000, $1 million, like that shouldn't overall negatively impact your overall value of your variance. So you could set that as an internal ledger, but I would do a quick check, or maybe just think through all your non-customer ledgers and your suspense accounts, because we want to make sure that you're not creating just like a junk drawer of a ledger on a non-customer ledger. So you should be able to, at any point in time, justify the amounts that you're maintaining on a non-customer ledger, because we want to make sure that we're not just saying, hey, this account is out of balance, so this is unknown, so I'm going to move it to a non-customer ledger and mark that as internal so that that's not reporting as the overall variance. That's not a valid accounting practice, and we just want to make sure that you can justify the non-customer ledger balances that you're maintaining on these customer or client funds accounts. Typically, client funds accounts should only maintain client funds accounts, so you want to make sure that you balance all of those funds, but there are situations, just like I talked about with the sweep customer ledgers, that you have validly moved out money, and you need to record that on the ledger because it impacts your overall bank balance, but you need to make sure that you can justify that. And like, let's say that you're holding a negative $2.5 million on a sweep customer ledger. If you close that account, or you knew that like you needed to move that money back because that sweep is no longer valid, or you're paying everything out in that account, then you know exactly, hey, I have $2.5 million of my customer's money in another account, and I need to transfer that back in to make that whole. So there shouldn't be really any mystery. Now I know that there are overall variances maybe related to beginning balances or true unknowns. So if you have that tied to like your master account or to a suspense account, I would just make it a practice to, one, report that on the Kanban board so that you can track that in a card form, and then two, regularly or even on a daily basis, try to either clear out unknown transactions on there, or start making justifications or courses of actions to cover that money. So like if you've gone through all your subledger reconciliation, you had a variance of $50,000 when you started with beginning balances. So your account is saying that it's $50,000 short on your tax account. Eventually, when you close that tax account, you're going to have to make that $50,000 whole. And because it's unknown and maybe you won't be able to recoup it from a previous reconciliation process prior to Finlee, I would consider at some point moving operational money to cover that, and so that that is whole. If there is like, if you can't do that at that time, that completely makes sense. That's perfectly fine. But you are technically at that time, how I view it is that you're using other customers' money that has since come in to cover that deficit of that $50,000. So to us, we want to make sure that we can always justify suspense or non-customer ledgers, because that does tie back to actual bank activity in your physical bank account that you're holding that should only be customer funds. And yeah, we don't want to necessarily do that. Now, there are some accounts that have aspects of non-customer money, like you're moving in revenue as well, and then you need to eventually move that out. So I understand the need for them, but we don't want to just hide them under internal ledgers if it's not justifiable. Like it's not just sweep amounts that we're moving out that we know that we need to mark as internal. But if there's an unknown element to it, we either need to, one, make that whole, or start trying to go back and research why there's some unknown elements to that. So that's really all I wanted to say for today's webinar. I'll give you guys some time back, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat. Topic suggestion as always. I do appreciate your guys' time today. Thanks so much for hopping on. We will stick around for a few minutes just in case anyone has any questions. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for attending as always. Stop sharing my screen. Thank you, everyone. Stick around just in case anyone has a question. Thanks, Lisa. Nice to see you. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Autumn. Thanks, Susan. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks. All right. Bye.